Chairman, sorry to interrupt. Could we start over? We did not capture audio at the start of that.
Yes, we'll start all over. I'll turn my mic on. All right, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Wildlife Board meeting today. Date of record is January 4th, 2024. I'd like to remind the audience and everyone that this is being broadcast live and that all comments need to be made in the microphone at the appropriate time. We'll introduce the board members. We'll start with Brett.
Brett Selman, Northern Region.
Bryce Thurgood, Northern.
Paula Richmond.
And we have one board that will be excused just for a few minutes. I don't think he's online. He's on his way here. The road conditions were a little bit terrible today.
Randy, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, Gary, appreciate you. Are you still traveling?
Yeah, Gary Nielsen, Central Region.
Thank you, Gary. Travel safe. We'll go at this time. I'd like to introduce our RAC chairs. If you'll start with you, Austin.
Austin Atkinson, Cedar City, Southern Region.
Chris.
I'm Chris Wood. I'm the regional supervisor for the Division of Wildlife out of the Southeastern Region. I'm filling in for Eric Luke today, who could not be here.
Thank you.
Brock McMillan, Central Region.
Brad Buchanan, Northern Region.
And we've got Grizz Oline online. Grizz, would you introduce yourself?
Grizz Oline, Northeastern Region.
Thank you, Grizz. Let's go ahead and at this time we'll discuss the agenda. Is there any modifications or changes needed to the agenda for today? If not, I'll call for a motion.
Motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Motion was made by Kent, seconded by Brett. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Gary. Now our last minutes of November 28th, 2023. Is there any changes or modifications need to those minutes?
I move we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
Motion made by Brett, second by Bryce. All in favor, raise your hand. Unanimous here, and Gary?
Yes.
Thank you. As far as the action log, I did talk to Gary this morning. There's nothing new to discuss on the action log at this time. So we'll turn the time over to Justin Shannon for our director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Justin Shannon. I'm a deputy director. We'd like to excuse Director Shirley today. He's on vacation with his family. So to begin, we have a few personnel changes that we'd like to highlight. One involves our leadership team. We'd like to congratulate Blair Stringham on his new position. He's a Northern Region supervisor. Blair was involved in the waterfowl program for years, and most recently he was involved as held the position of our Wildlife Migration Initiative coordinator. And he replaces Ben Nadolski, who was recently sworn in as mayor of Ogden. And we appreciate Ben. Ben's worked with us for 23 years, did a lot of great things for our agency, and we're going to miss him and his leadership. Also, right now with personnel changes, we're in the process of hiring or interviewing many conservation officers. We have an extensive process for that, and they're right in the midst of it. And super grateful and impressed with the caliber of officer that we've been hiring recently. It's been great. These cohorts that are coming in are top notch, and we hope that trend continues. And that's what this hiring process does for us. So next slide. Moving on to our administrative services section. We expect limited entry turkey results to be available January 10th, so next week sometime. Also, our black bear application period runs from February 6th to February 20th. Recently, Congress passed the Duck Stamp Modernization Act of 2023, and this is a good thing. It allows for the issuance of electronic duck stamps. We started this last year, and really what this federal legislation does is it allows the length of the electronic duck stamp to be the length of our season. Before it was a 45-day duck stamp, but and then finally, our big game application period is going to be March 21st to April 25th. In the aquatic section, they recently met with the conservation teams, and we have several throughout the state, and these include agency partners and nonprofit organizations. The work that they do is really important. It prioritizes work for species that need conservation. For example, our western toad, Columbia spotted frog, least chub, round-tailed chub, species like that. This work helps ensure the future biological security of these species, and it prevents listings under the Endangered Species Act. And the species that they've been working with as of late were not found warranted under the ESA. Our habitat section, pretty busy right now. Winter's a time of planning and preparing for the next year. They just, right now with our WMAs, they've closed several of those to protect wildlife, and many of these will be reopened in the spring. The Watershed Restoration Initiative is where a lot of the planning is starting. I got ahead of myself a little bit. They are beginning the funding cycle right now, and they're coordinating with their partners on a variety of projects that can be implemented this next year if everything goes well. We greatly appreciate the partners that make all this happen. When we travel to other states and talk about that great work we're doing for habitat in Utah, WRI is a shining example of what good things can be accomplished when people come together and pool their resources and try to do good things for wildlife and their habitats. So, our law enforcement section's been busy. There were 656 deadheads submitted through the Deadhead app from May 1st to December 14th. Just over 400 elk and almost 200 deer, among other species. In 2023, there were approximately 1,000 calls turned in or submitted to the Turn In a Poacher hotline, and 650 additional tips came in via text. Let me clarify that. Wyatt, is that in addition, or is that 650 of the 1,000 were? Okay, so about 1,650 total reports, which I think is great. I love it when our hunting public and others can self-police and be that resource for our agency and our officers. There were 114 different canine officer deployments last year. 97 were for our agency, and an additional 17 were to assist other agencies. Yeah.
Sorry, how many was last year on the deadheads? Just curious.
How many total?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really high year, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Just curious.
We'd let Officer Bubak, or our chief, present that.
Yeah, I don't know what that number is, but I can get it for you here pretty quick. I'd imagine it's higher this year. Certainly in the northern region, it's higher. I want to say the southern region is somewhere around 300, 350 by themselves. And they usually constitute a healthy portion of that. So I'd say we're 500 or 600 on a typical year. But usually we only have about 50 in the northern region. We're probably close to 150 or more there. So.
Thanks, Bryce. Our outreach section, they've been busy with a construction project on the Cache Valley Public Shooting Range. They're adding a new shotgun building or improving that one. And it's a big upgrade over the old structure that they've had. It should be up and running later this month, which we're excited about. And we plan to hold a grand opening this spring when it gets a little bit warmer and celebrate that new additional opportunity for shotgun shooters in Cache Valley. Also, there's going to be several bald eagle viewing events throughout the state over the next month or two. And the first one is going to be on January 26th. And we'll have details on our website. The wildlife section had a very busy December, like we have every December for the last, 10, 15 years. They've caught and processed and collared 1,050 animals so far. Most of those have been deer. I got a report this morning. Our deer, although we suffered big losses last year in many pockets of the state, up north especially, The adults and fawns are looking really good. Adults were heavy fawning. Fawns were nursing later into the season this year, and fawn weights are up, especially in southern Utah, and pretty good in northern and central as well. But in December, just last month, this is one that's gotten a lot of attention. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they released 10 wolves in north central Colorado. And over the last year or so, we've worked closely with them in Arizona and New Mexico and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure we have tools in Utah and some management decisions that we can make, that if wolves get into Utah, we have the ability to capture them and take them back to Colorado. And so that's been a great effort with working with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food with their state trappers and getting prepped for that as wolves get reintroduced back into Colorado. In addition to that, the North American wolverine was recently listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the last thing I have for the wildlife section is in 2023, tundra swan season did not close early. Only 9 trumpeters were harvested, and hunters took a record number of swans during that season. So I know the decisions we made last, last spring as a board, I can't remember, last year as a board, I guess it was, that was a hot topic, and it seemed to have worked and extended that season. So good things there. The only other thing I'd have is Paige Wyron told me that today is Utah's 128th birthday. So happy birthday to the state of Utah, and that's all I have. Oh, yes. Did we want to show that video next, Mike? Okay. One last thing we have for you this morning. I probably should have started with this. We have a video that we wanted to share with the board and the RAC and the public. It's a video on why we hunt. Utah, if you look at the interest in hunting in Utah, it continues to increase. And I read some stuff this morning that talked about nationwide, 87% of the public supports hunting. And even though we don't have 87% of the citizens of Utah that hunt, we have great support for hunting. And one of the things that we wanted to do was explain the why behind it through some of our outreach efforts. So we wanted to share that now.
People ask why I hunt, and it's pretty simple. Hunting makes me happy. My favorite part is the time outdoors with my dog and seeing how excited she is. We're a great team. Hunting is also a fun way to stay healthy and connect with nature. I get a lot of exercise and sunshine. If we bring home birds, it's a bonus. We have fresh, lean meat for dinner. So yeah, hunting makes me happy. Get your hunting license today at wildlife.utah.gov.
Thank you. I know hunting does make me happy too. It's fun. It's fun to get outside and see the wildlife, whether you're successful or not. It's a real joy. All right, Justin, thank you. Appreciate that update very much. A lot of good things, and yeah, that tundra swan season, that was good to hear, because that was pretty controversial, and sounds like we made some good decisions there. All right, we'll start with our first. Actually, we got an informational item at this time, so we'll ask our law enforcement chief Wyatt to give us an update on inedible byproducts rule amendment update.
You will wait for the slides to pull up, and then I'll get going. All right, so as stated earlier by the board, this is just informational. So I just wanted to quickly cover some changes that we've seen in rule, specifically since November, related to the taking of big game rule, and specifically the inedible byproducts portion of that rule. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so in April, the Division of Wildlife took a rule proposal change for the taking a big game rule through the RAC process in April. The portion I want to speak to today is specific to the inedible portion, or the sale of inedible byproducts portion of that rule. In that rule, it said that you could sell inedible byproducts. We did not define what inedible byproducts were, so it wasn't overly clear on if you could or couldn't sell organs of big game animals. It wasn't clear on if you could or couldn't sell the scraps associated with, let's say, typical processing of big game animals, bone marrow, things of that nature. And additionally, there were some potential commercialization concerns as well as some disease concerns associated with the sale of these products. So the division in April took that rule through the RAC process and essentially recommended that we prohibit the sale of inedible byproducts associated with big game. And the board passed that rule or approved that rule in the May board session. In October, we heard from a number of personnel that operate companies that have been in business for a number of years selling the inedible portions of byproduct from processed big game. We were aware that these companies for the volume of product that they been aware of that. We would have included them as we do in many other processes in discussions before the recommendation. But because of that prohibition that was passed in that rule, they had some concerns about how that would affect their business and essentially not allow them to do business. And so in November, the Utah Senate Rules Committee asked the Division of Wildlife to come and present on specifically the inedible byproduct change in the big game rule. And at the end of that meeting, the Senate repealed that portion of the big game rule back to its prior state before it was approved by the board, and asked the division to work with the industry to see if there was some common ground that we could meet on that would allow them to continue operations, but also protect our concerns as an agency. So since November, since that Senate meeting, we've essentially been meeting with those industry personnel weekly and continue to have some discussions regarding where we can land there that we're both comfortable.
Thank you, Wyatt. Any questions for Wyatt? Thank you. We have one more informational topic. Rusty Robinson, he'll come up and discuss the shed antler gathering recommendations. Rusty is our once in a lifetime species coordinator.
Thank you. Yeah, I was asked to chair a committee to address some shed antler issues. If you go to the next slide, Mike. Thanks. So as I'm sure we all remember, last winter we had unprecedented snowfall, which caused significant wildlife loss in some parts of the state and resulted in an emergency shed hunting closure statewide. At that time, a lot of concerns were voiced about shed hunting, and it was decided that we would form a shed hunting committee to address some of those concerns. So soon after, we formed the committee, which included diverse representation of stakeholders, including regional representatives and others. Some of the topics that we discussed is what was working well, any concerns or challenges that we had, the potential for having a season in Utah or some sort of seasonal closure, requirements to participate in the sport, law enforcement issues, and we went through all the available data and research on the topic. The committee made several recommendations to the DWR. Some of those changes would require legislative action to implement. Some would require changes in rule. So this presentation is just an update. It's a synopsis of what we went through and what the committee decided. Nothing outlined today is an action item that we'll vote on, but we are open to the board's feedback and questions. And some of these recommendations may change as we go through the process. They're not final. So when we come back later for RAC and board vote, then some of these may change. The first set of recommendations that the committee had dealt with seasons and closures. So the committee recommended that residents would not have a seasonal closure in the traditional sense, However, non-residents would have a restricted season running from May 1st to December 31st. So residents could shed hunt year round, but non-residents would not be allowed to come in until May 1st. They did recommend one exception to this where, and there was a sentiment in the committee that there was some frustration, frankly, of neighboring states that Utah residents. And so kind of the sentiment behind this was, if your state regulates us, we're going to regulate you. But if your state doesn't regulate Utah residents, then we're going to allow you to come in and shed hunt with the residents year round. So at the time, that was only Idaho and Arizona that didn't have non-resident restrictions. Since then, Idaho has implemented a closure, and so now it's just down to Arizona. But that is the recommendation, that non-residents will be held to May 1st season start unless you were a resident from a state that didn't restrict Utah residents. And I'm sorry if that's confusing, but they also recommended that emergency closures be tied to our winter feeding policy. So if the triggers that are in our deer feeding policy are met, where we start feeding deer, then an automatic emergency antler gathering closure would be implemented statewide. And the other thing they recommended was to give law enforcement the tools they need to enforce violations and really put some teeth in it. The next set of recommendations from the committee dealt with licensing and permitting requirements to participate in shed hunting, and this is by age. So under these requirements, a person that's 11 years old and under wouldn't have to have any kind of licensing or permitting. A youth that's 12 to 17 years old would be required to possess a hunting or combination license, and adults participating in shed hunting would be required to possess a hunting license and a shed antler gathering permit. And you would only need this documentation from January 1st to May 31st. After that, you wouldn't need any licensing or permitting. And the thought behind that was, if somebody was out hiking or walking their dog in the summer and they're not familiar with these rules, they're not a hunter or shed hunter, but they find a shed, they're not a criminal in that sense. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. The antler gathering ethics course would still be required with those amended dates from January 1st to May 31st. The committee also provided direction on commercial antler markets. One of the recommendations was to require commercial antler buyers to apply for and purchase a certificate of registration. We would then define what a commercial antler buyer is in rule, and we would also address the other commercial industries, dog chews, crafts, jewelry, all that kind of stuff. So some things we were working on currently with the legislature is to set a cost of the shed antler gathering permit, assign a restitution value to shed antlers, establish licensing and permit requirements by age, and give law enforcement the ability to revoke hunting privileges if there's a severe shed hunting violation. Also clearly outline the Utah Wildlife Board's authority in this. The timeline for all this is, currently we're working with the legislature to capture some of these recommendations in code. This legislative session ends in March, after which we would present any proposed rule changes and committee recommendations to the RACs and Wildlife Board in either the April or May RAC cycle, whichever Stacy tells me is the best for that. And any changes that are approved would be implemented at the beginning of 2025 for that, I want to say shed season, but it's not a season, but when sheds are dropping 2025, they would already be implemented. And with that, I'd just like to thank the shed committee. I've been a part of a few committees, and this one was top notch. Just a bunch of really fair, reasonable, selfless people that were willing to compromise and think outside the box. And so they were great to work with. And with that, I'll take any questions or feedback from the board.
A couple of questions, Rusty.
Sure.
On your season differences between residents and non-residents, how exactly how is that going to work out? And what does law enforcement think about something that's that convoluted and that much moving parts going on at the same time?
It would, so first of all, non-residents would still be required to purchase a hunting license, and if they're adult, also a shed hunting permit. And so they would already have non-resident licensing, which outlined their specific dates that they could shed hunt in Utah. So I don't know if it'd be that convoluted in that sense, but yes, the agreements with the other states that don't regulate us, that would be complicated, and we're still working through that. So I don't know if I have a great answer for that one.
Okay, that was the
it
one
does-
I was
it-
specifically
yeah,
getting at.
it does raise some.
Sorry for not being clear.
It does raise some significant issues, both with our licensing system and also law enforcement, yes. But this is what the committee recommended, and we're just giving you an update of what they
Okay.
recommended, and things
Okay,
may
I-
change.
Yeah, I understand. I was just wondering if the committee, if that had been discussed in there, if there's any thought or if law enforcement had given their opinions on it. Just a couple more questions. Another one is, he's mentioned addressing industry, antler industry products, crafts or whatever people. So what would that look like in your mind? Because you got a lot of guys that they gather up shed antlers themselves. They make knife handles or whatever, dog chews,
Right.
trinkets, things like that. I mean, antler chandeliers are fairly popular that people make on their own. What are you talking about? You mentioned addressing that. So what specifically are you talking about?
So that statement specifically was, right now there's some language in rule that makes it frankly kind of confusing of when you can sell antler products for those types of industries. The way it's written, it sounds like you can't sell dog chews even before a certain date that's outlined in the guidebook. And so we just want to clean that up. And so it's not that we're going to ban those markets. It's that we're going to clarify what's legal and what's not. So,
Okay.
yeah. And allow for those activities, frankly.
Okay. And the final question is, what specific legislation has been talked about that you want the legislature to look at with regard to code?
Yeah, let me pull that back up. Yeah, so in code, we would have to, right now, the shed antler gathering permit and set a price for it, a cost for it, and then outline the different ages and how that works with having a hunting license and a permit. But also to help law enforcement, one thing in particular is to assign a restitution value for shed antlers, which kind of, and I'm not law enforcement, so Wyatt can correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of dictates how severe a violation or punishment is based on, restitution value and that sort of thing. And then and the other thing we're trying to tackle in code is associate hunting privileges with shed hunting violations, so that if you're caught violating shed hunting rules, based on severity, it can result in hunting privileges being taken away. So those are some of the things.
One quick question on on the emergency closure, if there's feeding happening. Generally, that's northern Utah because of the terrain and geography. There's a lot more winter range in southern
Right.
Utah. So did they discuss that difference of closing down the whole state versus half the state?
Yeah, and we discussed that, and in the end, we've in my memory, we've had 2 emergency shed hunting closures in the last 6 or 7 years, and the first one started as a regional closure, and we started hearing a lot of negative feedback that, hey, everyone's now coming to southern Utah. We need to close the whole state if we're going to do this. And we talked about that. And that's what we did this past year with the emergency closure. The committee liked that. They didn't want the influx of people bombarding a region that was still open. And so they decided that if we're going to close it anywhere, we're going to close it statewide. So.
Rusty, I obviously participate a little bit on this. And I understand why they wanted to change the seasons for non-residents, especially I mean, no hiding, it's Wyoming that originally did this, but the thing that scares me is like it's a race to see who's gonna put the screws to somebody else the fastest. And what starts with shed hunting, what's next? You know, we're non-residents in other states. I just wish that the states could all get on the same page, because I think it would alleviate a lot of the problems. If it was an opener, you know, in all the states on the same day, you wouldn't have the influx to people bouncing around to these states. And I wish we could all get on the same page, because I just worry that, you know, I asked the guys from Wyoming, okay, you guys did this, or next, are you going to say non-residents can't hunt the first half of the season? You know, that's where we're going. And I don't like where we're going. I wish we could all get on the same, not see who can, you know, hammer the other one the worst.
Right. Yeah.
So I especially now that Idaho's changed, I wish we could honestly go back and look at that and maybe work with other states to come up with a kind of a, you know, and I know you guys go to WAFA and talk to other states. I think it'd be nice if you guys could really sit down and work out something that everybody was on the same page. So, because I just don't like where it's going.
My turn. I think something that's been overlooked in all this is private property rights. Deer drop horns at haystacks, in yards, in fields. That I think that these closures, private property ought to be exempt from these closures. We have trespass laws to keep people off. We need to enforce those. But I think, you know, on feed rows, you know, where we're feeding cattle and sheep and there's horns that are dropped, we need to be able to pick those up. So I think we need to take a hard look at private property rights on this. I kind of feel like that's been overlooked.
I'm glad you brought that up, Brett, because as you know, and I didn't include it here because it's not something the committee came up with at the time, but afterwards we've heard some of those concerns, and I believe we'll try to address that and rule that, you know, that these shouldn't inhibit normal agricultural practices or things like that. If you need to move an antler that's, you know, you're going to run over going to your haystack or something, you know, you shouldn't be a criminal for that type of thing. So.
And just FYI, Brett, Idaho's new rule does not apply to private ground. It only applies to public.
I understood that with Idaho, and I kind of like that, but
Yeah, I'm not positive. I think Colorado does also. Bryce, just to your point that 3 years ago, this was brought up at the WAFA meeting and talked with all the other commissioners, and that kind of spawned the meeting we had 2 years ago, last year. The one we had with
At the expo?
Yes, yeah, kind of spawned that meeting. So there wasn't a whole lot of, I guess, interest in doing that. Any other question for Rusty?
one thing, Rusty, that I'd maybe involve the Farm Bureau in that private property part of things. They seem to be level heads that represent us well in the ag side of things.
That's good feedback. I appreciate that.
One last question, Rusty. Follow up with what Bryce asked you and his comments. Was there any discussion in the committee about trying to bring Utah's shed antling regulations in line with the surrounding states? And kind of try to have some sort of cohesiveness?
There was, and the sentiment of the committee is we're Utah, we can we can do what Utah wants to do. We don't have to line up with other states. And that was the universal sentiment there.
I just think the cooperation now, especially the Idaho's done it. Every state basically around us has done it. I think we need to relook at that. So.
Yeah, just to Bryce's point a little bit there, I think Wyoming passed a rule last year requiring non-residents to wait, I think it was a 4 days after residents get a chance to. So I think that's just so that those that might not be knowledgeable about that, where he's coming from, who's gonna trump who. That's yeah. We love non-residents to come to our state, just to make that clear. Thank you, Rusty. Anything else for us?
That's it. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate all you've done on this. This is really good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll jump to our first action item, Utah Black Bear Management Plan Revision and Rule. And we'll ask Darren DeBlois, our mammals coordinator, is there anything you'd like to discuss before we get into this?
I can
Darren?
just give a quick overview of what we're asking for, what we're recommending. Again, this is the third year of our 3-year bear recommendation cycle, so we're not recommending any permit changes at this time. Next year will be the time we'll bring permit recommendations. We are asking one change to the management plan, which would allow for us to remove a requirement for a statewide roll-up. That all of the harvest parameters statewide fall within our moderate hunting range. We're asking to get rid of that out of the management plan. One of the things that the Bear Committee wanted to do when we met last year is give more responsibility to our district biologists and allow them to make decisions about their individual districts, and that runs counter to that recommendation. And frankly, it's an oversight when we did that. And then finally, we are recommending a rule amendment that the board asked us to do last time we talked about bears, and that is to allow a person to draw their permit, take the mandatory orientation course after they have the permit. And so we're just recommending that we change the rule to allow for that. So that's it. It's really a simple list this year.
Thank you, Darren. Any questions from board members?
I do have a quick question. For the permit numbers, I guess coming up for next year, it doesn't fully apply right now, but what are the checks and balances for biologists that might have their own biases on their permit numbers?
Yeah.
How do you check and make sure that's not skewed?
There's always several levels. So I think we've created the impression that the biologists will be wholly autonomous, and that's not the case. They'll make a recommendation for their district based on their knowledge of the district and what they feel like management strategy should be. But then that will go through a wildlife manager. We'll take a look at it, and then that will go through me and the wildlife or the mammals coordinator, and then ultimately the director's office looks at all those too. So there's several layers of people who have different perspectives of what the statewide need is to look necessary before they come to the board.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions, Bryce?
Quick question. I know it didn't come before the RACs, but in the Bear Committee, they talked about the use of barrels.
Yeah.
It kind of just seems like a no-brainer that you would use a
came up,
barrel and use it, because it seems like it would just contain.
That's how the committee felt, Bryce.
Yeah.
And late in the process, our federal partners came back with some concerns about that. We're still open to having a discussion with the Forest Service and the BLM about being able to do that. And so we can pursue that. If the board would like us to do that, we certainly could.
I would encourage it because the sites are registered, right?
Yeah.
They know whose barrels they are.
I think,
And it just, I think 10 years ago, I could see the concern, but not today. It's a lot cleaner, easier. I think it makes a lot of sense.
we've got data from other states that allow it. The members of the committee that represented those agencies were comfortable with it. But when they took it back to their agencies, I think there were some questions. So I think we just need to go up the line and have a discussion.
So another question is, why do they allow it on their ground in
Yeah,
other
that's
states?
a good question.
That
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions from board members? RAC chairs, any questions from the RAC chairs? Not seeing any. I see Grizz shaking his head no also. Very good. Well, we'll ask the Justin if he'll summarize the electronic comments.
Thank you. We received 4 comments on this agenda item. 3 of the comments, or 75%, were strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, and 1 comment, or 25%, was neutral. 2 main themes in all these comments. The first was that instead of carrying the certificate around, just add the certificate number to the actual permit. And the second is a lot of smaller bears are being harvested in southern Utah, and this individual would prefer less tags to improve quality.
Thank you, Justin. We'll go to our RAC chair reports. On our motions, we'll start with you, Austin, and we'll end up with Grizz.
Thank you. Yeah, in the Southern Region, we had one motion on this agenda item, and that was to accept the Black Bear Management Plan revisions as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Yeah, the Southeastern Region passed the division's proposal 10-1. Should probably mention there was some discussion from the Utah Houndsman Association who came to our meeting and requested that we reduce tags on several of the units, a 10 tag reduction for the Book Cliffs, Boulder, San Juan, and La Sal's. There was some discussion on that, but in the end, the RAC voted 10-1 to approve it. The 1 vote was in favor of the Houndsman recommendation.
Thank you, Chris. Rob?
Central is very similar to South. We had a lot of discussion about the Houndsman Association that came and recommended tag reductions. Even though tag numbers weren't open for discussion, there was a motion to reduce tags. That motion failed for a second. Then there was a motion to pass as recommended, and that motion passed with 1 against.
Thank you, Brock. Brad?
Northern Region, we had a bit of discussion on a couple of things, ended up in 2 separate motions. The first was to accept the revisions as proposed, but ask the Wildlife Board to consider allowing for the purchase of a second control tag. And the second motion was ask the board to revisit the barrel use requirement at bait sites, and both of those passed unanimously.
Froze up on me there. I don't know if you're waiting on me or not. But in Northeastern Region, we did have some discussion similar to the other regions with the Houndsman. And we only had 1 motion on it. That was to accept the recommendation, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you, Grizz. We'll start with our public comments. There is public comment cards back on the back table for anyone that would like to offer a comment on this subject or the next few action items. Please fill out a comment card. They're the green ones, and hand them to these sweet ladies over here, and they'll get them up to us. We'll start with our first comment on this one. Sierra Nelson.
I almost didn't make this. You guys were so fast this morning. I like it. My name is Sierra Nelson. I'm with the Utah Wool Growers Association. I sincerely appreciate the board's time today. I was actually on the bear committee, and we discussed barrels and barrels and barrels. And I told them that the best thing that they could do is just get wool barrels, because, they're 100% biodegradable and there'd be no problems with the riparian area. So if they could just do that, I think we could get the Forest Service behind us. We would like to see the barrels, though. That'd be great. I want to express our support for the division's recommendations. I realize that there have been people who would like to see the tag numbers go down. I would strongly urge you, even though it's not a tag year, to boost them up, because whether people want to admit it or not, we've got a bear problem. Their population is increasing, and whether that interferes with your hunt of bears or not, it's going to become a larger problem if we don't make sure to manage it through our tags. So we would really like to see the numbers go up. That's not what you're voting on this year, but I want to express that. And I think a lot of times people go back to, well, we've seen the amount of depredation go down. No, you haven't. You've seen the amount of reported confirmed depredation go down. That's harder than it sounds because there aren't that many people in the state that can confirm kills. And especially in the summer, they melt down so fast when you get there, there's not much left that isn't smelly maggots. So just because something's not reported doesn't mean it's not happening. It's not like a barcode system. We're like, oh, boop, that's out of your inventory. It's different than that. So please don't lay off the bears. Please keep going. Thank you guys for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sierra. Next up is Kevin Norman with the SFW.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We support. I also came to in support of the barrels. I think it's a no-brainer. There's tree stands, there's trail cams, there's all kinds of things that we put on the landscape, but these are there for a short time. It'll keep the sites cleaner, less tear up of the ground, and I think it's a no-brainer to move in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Corey Huntsman, Utah Houndsman. That was our last comment unless someone else has one.
Corey Huntsman. I'm with Utah Houndsman Association, and we do support the division's recommendations. Looking at the data earlier in the year, it'd show that the majority of the state would, if we were to adjust numbers this year, it'd be call for a decrease other than about 4 units, but we support it this year and can hold off till next year to talk about it since there doesn't seem to be any kind of emergency situations going on.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, we'll bring, that's our last comment card. We'll come back to Darren. Is there anything that you feel that needs to be clarified from the comments you heard?
I don't think so, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll summarize the motions in the Central Region. They wanted to decrease the tags, and that died for lack of second. Then there's a motion to accept as presented. Northern Region had a motion to consider the purchase of a second control tag, and that passed unanimous. And then there was a motion to revisit the barrel requirement, and that passed unanimous. The Southern Region and the Northern Region were both similar. They had a motion to accept the plan as presented, and the Southeast Region will say same thing. It just wasn't passed unanimous. The Southeast Region passed it as presented. Okay, we'll come back to discussion from the board. Go ahead.
Just one quick question and comment for Deputy Director and maybe for Stacy. Would it be appropriate for the board to make a motion and actually have a request that we get clarification from the district managers for the Forest Service and BLM in Utah to ask why they have different opinions and different set of rules regarding barrels than what the Forest Service does in any other state?
I'll take this one, Stacy. All right with that? Okay. Yeah, I think if this is something that we wanted to put on the action log item, we could do it sooner than later. I don't think it would be overly difficult to set up a meeting with federal agencies, get some clarification. And if I remember right, our plan allows for it. We just didn't implement it. Is that correct, Darren?
Yeah, really the bottom line was that they had some concerns about NEPA and whether NEPA would be required. And so we just need to hammer that out. I don't think it would be, again, we just need to meet with them and explain what we're looking at. And the local representatives were in favor until those questions came up. So yeah, we're happy to do that.
Okay, so Darren, does the division, would you require a motion on that, or is that just something you're just gonna take the ball and run
I
with?
think it's up to the board. If you want to put it on an action log, we're happy to act on it, but we could do it either way. So however you'd like to proceed.
All right,
I think if it's on the action log item, it's on our radar. We'll come back and report on it. And I don't know the due date, but whatever the board decides, we'll try to make that work.
okay. Do you want a motion now, Mr. Chair? Or do we-
I think a motion would be appropriate. We're talking about this,
Okay.
discussing it.
Do you want me to restate that motion or just,
Please do.
okay. So I would like to make a motion that we put on the action log to have the division work with the federal land management agencies to address any concerns that they might have with regard to putting barrels at bait stations. That cover it, Stacy?
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Gary. Any discussion?
That we could possibly have it in place before this meeting next year.
Yeah, add that into the motion. You still
Okay.
second that, Gary?
No discussion. I'll call for a raise of hands on the vote. Brett, he raised both hands. All right, thank you. Look, it was unanimous, Stacy. All right, get back to the plan. Any other discussion on the proposed plan?
I'd like Brad to explain the control tags, the second control tag that they talked about in the Northern Region.
It was more just from, right now, we allow, let me make sure I get this right. Maybe Darren should explain it more than I should, but it was more along the desire of opening up the options of having that second tag being a control tag, because right now you can only have one control tag. Is that correct?
It depends on the situation, but yeah, you could buy a control tag in depredation situations. We can issue additional permits to take bears that are depredating, both for livestock and for agriculture. But you can't keep those bears if you kill those bears in the process. The control tag essentially allows a person to keep a second bear. Those are the current restrictions. There could be, if we wanted to create a new tag, that'd be a legislative thing, but I think under the current rule, yeah, if the board wanted to allow for the take of a second bear, we could certainly look at it, but it'd be similar to Cougar, what we did where we allowed for the take of two before the legislature changed things last year. So does that help?
I think Darren, on the 96-hour rule, a
Right.
person can keep that bear, but a depredation.
You'd have to buy that.
Yeah, you
that
have to buy
tag.
it.
Yeah, and it's like I don't even know what it costs. I'd have to check, but it's probably 30 or 40 bucks. if I
Yeah, it
remember
used to
right.
be 25. That was years
Yeah.
ago, but
Right.
but on that situation you can, but a depredation tag you cannot keep. that.
Right, right, yeah. So those bears would be turned into the division. Which hides if we can.
Thank you, Brett, for bringing that up. Any discussions or motions along that line? Okay. Any other discussion? Talked about the barrels, or that was one of the issues that they brought up, and the other was a control tag from Rex. Well, I'll entertain a motion for this item then.
I'll make a motion that we accept the bear plan as presented.
I'll second it.
Motion by Gary, second by Brett to accept as presented. Any discussion? Call for raise of hands. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is Item number 8, the elk management plan, unit plans. Daniel Salee of our wildlife coordinator. Oh, thank you. We're working on that.
Is it on now? There we go. Okay. So we're taking the unit elk plans through the rack and board process. We have 8 plans with recommended changes to the population objective. The majority of those are increases. And we have 2 plans that have been split apart into 2 separate units each. So that's our basic summary. I can provide more information if you guys would like.
I think probably we've all had the opportunity to see the presentation and watch the RACs visit. So thank you for that. Start with questions from the board on elk unit plans. Any questions? Questions from the RAC chairs? Not seeing any questions there. We'll ask Justin if he'll summarize the online comments.
Yes. Agenda item number 8 had 4 comments submitted. 75% of them, or 3, were strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, and we had 1 or 25% that somewhat disagreed. The main themes included support for an increase on the population objective for the Yellowstone unit as opposed to the decrease because of the elk that would end up on tribal lands. Another theme is support for the idea of more elk hunts, but would prefer to see more limited weapons on some of these units. A third comment we received is like to see CWMUs be limited to 5 days of hunting elk with rifles during the rut, like the public limited entry units are. One comment stated that they were not supportive of having bow sights removed from compound bows, and there were concerns that recent regulations proposed or implemented for mule deer are indicative of a broader trend, particularly for elk. And the last comment voiced concern for highly supportive, not concerned, but the comment was highly supportive of the recommended elk increases in the population objectives. It says the DWR and partners have done a good job rehabbing fires for wildlife habitat, and is they're supportive of sportsmen getting a return on those dollars. And that's the comments we had for this agenda item, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Justin. We'll go to our RAC chair reports. We'll start with you, Austin.
Thank you. Yeah, in the Southern Region, we had an extensive meeting where a lot of these changes in management plans fall in the Southern Region. And there was quite a few comments and discussion, both from the agricultural side and the sportsman side. Motion was as presented for all the changes to elk management unit plans, and that passed 10-1 with 1 opposing vote from our agricultural representative that felt there was not enough of an increase in their grazing permit allotments in their AUMs to warrant the increase in elk numbers. That's it.
Thank you, Austin. Chris?
The Southeastern Region RAC passed as proposed, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you, Brock.
Yeah, the Central Region had a motion to accept the division's recommendation as presented, and that passed unanimously as well.
Thank you, Brad.
Northern Region had a motion to accept as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Grizz?
Northeastern Region had a motion to accept it as presented, and that passed unanimously. There was also some concern brought up by permittees that if the division could, when we increase elk numbers on things like this, they should be able to increase their numbers on their permits on the forest as well. That was kind of one of the things that came out of it. Also, some other thoughts, because we had the one with the Southwest Yellowstone, where there was a lot of discussion about not counting the tribal elk on as part of the plan as well too, came out of it as well. So, but it was accepted as it's presented.
Thank you, Grizz. Move on to comments. I've not seen any comment cards. So we didn't have any comments from the audience here that's here today on this particular action item. So I'll just go ahead and summarize the RAC the votes. It looked like they were all 5 RACs approved it as presented. So we'll move on to board discussion. Any discussion?
I just want to add kudos to the division working so hard with sportsmen and agriculture to get a common ground on a lot of these numbers. This was not easy. They didn't just sit down and say, okay, here's what it is, and they're done. Like, a lot of discussion and time and effort went into these numbers. And I know in each region, especially, I'm from the South, so I know some of those firsthand, but there was a lot of discussion, a lot of give and take, and it was a really good thing to see sportsmen and agriculture come together on these numbers and make a decision and be happy with it. So huge props and kudos to the division, to all those that were on those committees and the sportsmen and wildlife side for coming together.
Thank you, Paula. I just want to address the AUM issues and stuff. That our growers, that's what mainly feeds our country. So we need to make sure that as wildlife managers, we do not do anything to take away from AUMs that they already have, that already exist there, and add wildlife in there just to and replace those. That's not a topic at all. I think we need to be going there at all, because those folks in our agriculture area right now, we respect them. We want them to keep doing what they're doing, and sometimes it gets tough when we got droughts. We've got to make some pretty hard decisions on what to do. But as far as those folks go, in my mind, we need to make sure that we support them the very best we possibly can with what they've already got. So, any other discussion?
I just want to chip in. I appreciate that discussion, and I appreciate working with the DWR on these things. And I think as long as we're doing that, and with SFWs working with all of us, and I think as long as all the voices are being heard, I think we're on the right direction. We can't ever always agree on everything, but as long as we're meeting in the middle and working together, I think we're winning.
Thank you, Brett. Any other discussion on this item? If not, I'll call for a motion.
I move that we approve this agenda item as presented.
I will second that.
Motion been made by Brett to approve as presented, seconded by Paula. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Daniel. All right, our next item is item number 9, poaching reported reward permit rules revisions. We'll ask Wyatt Bubank if he'll come up and see if there's anything he'd like to present to us before we get going on this item.
I did chase down those numbers, Bryce, from deadheads last year. So we average over the last 4 years about 470 per year. We had 450 per year. We had 670 this year. Last year in the Northern Region, 2022, I should say, we had 30 deadheads. We had 220 this year. So as far as this proposal goes, or recommendation, I'll just cover the 4 kind of key highlights of which we're addressing here. With the passing of House Bill 469, there are no longer cougar permits. The poaching reported reward permit rule allows for cougar permits to be issued. That's no longer applicable, so we're just proposing that be removed. The second thing would be to provide protections to those that have legitimate safety or financial concerns. So for example, a spouse or an ex-spouse, a business partner, or someone that has some potential concern or safety concerns with reporting of poaching, that they may be identified. We've implemented some things or have added some things for consideration that would protect their identity. Then that we have had a couple instances over the last 5 or 10 years where people report 2 or more poaching related incidents that would qualify under this rule. And the rule is a little bit stiff in how much flex we have for those individuals that report multiple instances in a year. And so we have an addition here that would allow for a little bit more understanding and acceptance of those that report multiple poachings in a year. And then the last one would just be to broaden the scope of violations in which would be eligible. Currently, it's want destruction. We hold want destruction to a very high standard. It's the most severe wildlife crime we have in Title 23A. It includes violations up to and including felonies. And for that reason, we're real cautious and have had multiple instances over the years where people provide very high quality information, commit a lot of time to helping us solve an investigation, and those crimes end up being charged as unlawful take. And so the proposal would be to include unlawful take of a trophy animal as an eligible violation upon which a reward permit can be issued. And that would be just a quick summary of kind of the 4 key things that this proposal would be recommending.
Thank you, Wyatt. Questions from the board for Wyatt? Go ahead, Kent.
Yeah, in the RACs, there was some discussion about people, feeling blowback, being sued, libel suits for turning somebody in for a poaching reward thing. I was wondering, would you or Kyle be willing to speak to that and just address that issue?
Yeah, sure. Again, when that was heard, I touched base with Kyle. He did some research, so he can speak to the concerns there.
Morning, Kyle Maynard, Assistant Attorney General for Division of Wildlife. So kind of walking back real quick, there's kind of 2 sides to this. The first is the division's records of those permits. Generally, your records of your license and permits are classified as private. So if an individual asks for someone's license information, we deny that request. To the question at the RAC is a little bit more difficult. So if someone finds out through the grapevine that they've been reported on by an individual, there's no law on the books currently that protects that person. Generally, there's protections for someone acting in good faith, reporting a crime. There's nothing explicit in law. So without giving legal advice and kind of just outlining the way that this could work is if the person's being sued for defamation, defense to defamation is usually the truth. So if an individual is reporting on the facts, I saw this, and they report it to law enforcement, generally they should be protected from civil liability. But at the moment, there's nothing really explicit in code. If there were some sort of legislative push, I don't imagine the division would have any issues with that. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think the concern of the individuals I watched that and listened, it just was, okay, so you did see something that is true, it did happen, but then there's a lawsuit filed. You still have to hire an attorney and answer that. And that was the thing being talked about that might address that issue where, if you did commit a crime, but you go ahead and sue the guy that turned you in anyway, what about the damages to that individual that has to answer that in court?
So there's a lot more to that than really I could answer here off the cuff. One of the unfortunate aspects of the law is you can be sued for anything. There's some protections from a frivolous lawsuit, but if there's no real case for reporting the truth and someone's sued for defamation, you'd still have to hire an attorney and file a motion to dismiss. Usually, and just say, "Look, there's no case here," which is unfortunate because you do have to hire an attorney. There's no clear-cut protections on the book that would make that faster. But again, if it's just the facts and it's the truth, then it'd kind of come down to the same conclusion.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. I felt like that should be addressed in this meeting and at least have that concern heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kyle. Any other questions from board members? Paula?
Yeah, one quick one on the last item. Do you expect a increase, like a huge increase on the number of tags that might be issued for,
poaching report,
I lost my words.
good.
Want destruction, but the other one.
The unlawful take.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would hope that there would be an increase because we would like to reward the public for helping us solve crimes that we wouldn't otherwise. As far as a substantial increase, no, I don't think that there would be a substantial increase. Currently, in the last 5 years, we averaged 6 to 8 reward permits a year. If we got a 15 or 20, I'd still be surprised. Comparing that to permits issued statewide, I mean, that's super minimal. But yeah, I would be surprised if we got to that 15 or 20 stage, but I would sure hope that it does increase because people deserve, some of the cases we had deserve a permit for sure.
Thank you. And that was brought up in Iraq, and I want to just send a shout out to the RACs. So we really appreciate all of the people that serve on the RACs and the time that you put in. You guys ask a lot of questions that we don't have to hear because you take care of it in the RACs. So thank you for all that you guys do with your RAC committees.
Thank you, Paula. Any other questions on the board? We'll go to the RAC chairs. Any questions from RAC chairs? Not seeing any. Okay. We'll ask Justin if you'll give us some summarization of the online comments.
Thank you. For agenda item number 9, we had 4 comments. 3 strongly agreed with the division's proposal and 1 strongly disagreed. The common themes were there's already a high number of false accusations out there, and offering better or more permits will just add to that problem. And the second theme, comments associated with supporting the division's proposal, stating that it'll be a big incentive to get more cases through the system.
Thank you, Justin. All right. We don't have any public comments on this particular item either. So we'll ask the RAC chairs to give a update on their motions.
All right, in the Southern Region, we just had one motion, and that was to accept this rule revision as presented, and it passed unanimously.
In the Southeastern region, there was a motion to accept as presented, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you, Chris. Brock?
In the Central Region, we had a board to recommend the division present associated with reward permits annually, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Brad?
The Northern Region, we had 2 motions. The first was to accept as presented, and that passed unanimously. The second one, just, I guess, a little backstory going along with Kent's questions there. We did have the individual approach us as the RAC asking about basically ways to bring some protection to reporting parties. Spoke of a individual he knows who reported and then is being threatened with a civil suit for defamation, and that's kind of where that discussion came from. So we had a motion to have the Wildlife Board take up with the legislature ways to protect the reporting parties from civil litigation, and that passed unanimously as well.
Thank you, Brad. Chris?
Northeastern Region only had one motion, and that was to accept the poaching reward permit rule as presented, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you. So basically this was all passed as unanimously with a couple of exceptions. On the Northern Region, they suggested to take up with the legislator ways to protect the poaching parties from civil litigation. and then the Central Region to present the data associated with the reward permit annually by the division. So we'll come to discussion from the board. Kent?
I'll go ahead and start it then. With following up my question, and that I felt like that was a good comment and a good thing to come out of the Northern RAC as I was watching that, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. I'd like to see us do something to, I mean, we've got the legislative session going right now. We've asked the division's liaison to maybe try to get some legislation pushed to protect people in that regard. Something where, if it is proof, there's a way to give them some sort of protection. I don't know what that might look like, and I don't know if it would be constitutionally even to do it, because the way our laws and our court system is structured. But is that something that we would want to just ask the division, like right now? I guess we could ask the director's office that question.
Yeah, thank you. I think Kyle did a good job of stating that if there were legislation that went down this road, I think generally we'd be supportive. With that said, the devil's in the details, and there are people that do report, and in my opinion, this is a much bigger issue than just wildlife reporting violations. I find it interesting that there hasn't been laws on this for all sorts of other false claims that could be made or real claims that don't get prosecuted. And so I think if it's written right, we could be supportive of it, and the devil's in the details. So.
Is there anything, we could do that other than maybe suggest it be done? I mean, discussed anywhere, but
that was kind of where I was going to. Do we want a motion for the action log or anything like that? Or
You could make Riley ask some questions when he goes up to the Capitol.
well, that was the intent of throw him under the bus on
Just
the
a
first
hint.
day,
I think I'll say this. I think it's worth a conversation. I really do. With our director's office and our Riley as our legislative liaison, and see where we want to go with this. As we dove into it, I mean, on the surface, it seems like, yes, this makes a lot of sense. But then there's other scenarios where it may not make sense. And to have legislation that tries to cover that wide pendulum of challenges or situations, I think could be challenging. I do think it's worth a conversation, and we'll commit to have it.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Justin. Other discussions on this item? Go ahead, Gary.
So do we need to put that in the action log to pursue discussions regarding that? I know there's a lot of people that make frivolous claims that turn people in, but if somebody made a substantial claim, but they were still unable to not prosecute it for whatever reason, then they would be open to civil liability. It'd be nice to somehow put something in there that would back them a little bit in trying to do the right thing. So.
Yeah, and I think Justin's committed to doing that with having those discussions going forward without actually having it on the action log.
I'm comfortable with Justin's statement there, just saying that the division's committed to it. I've seen him writing in his journal there too, so. Making
This
notes.
is a notebook, not a journal, but
Well, it's okay.
It has a heart on the top. It says Justin, so.
I also like the discussion in the Central Region about having the division report that back annually, how many poaching reported permits are issued and where. Not to whom, of course, but just the raw numbers and that data. I think that'd be a good thing. I agree with that.
Wyatt, you guys okay with that?
Yeah, we could produce those numbers easy enough.
Okay.
If I can build on that, it might be something that we could simply add to our annual report. We do an annual report every year that states the number of permits that were issued, harvest, success rates, all sorts of things. And I don't think it's something that we've included in the past, but we can.
Mind if I just ask one question to the board? There may be instances, if this rule passes presented, where we issue tags in order to protect individuals, and there's potential that a given unit, if there's one tag issued on a certain unit, that identity may be concerned. So I don't think reporting on general numbers as a whole concern, depending on the permits that we issued, if describing the units in which they were provided may put that identity at concern. So consider that in what we're being asked to report, but total numbers, general numbers, I don't see a concern there.
Wyatt, could the general numbers just be reported in region, not by unit?
That would be safer unless there's just one in a region. I mean, those numbers can be pretty low. So
I think statewide would be just elk. There were so many elk permits, so many deer permits, and just make it really simple.
yeah, and as long as we potentially have the flex, if we do identify like a legitimate concern in reporting those numbers, we have the flexibility to report what's requested, but maybe protect those identities in those instances where it might be subject to identification.
Thanks, Wyatt. That's good points.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion, we approve the poaching reported reward permit rule revision as presented.
I'll second it.
We got a motion by Bryce, seconded by Kent. Is that right? Any discussion to approve as presented? It looks like that.
Do you want the caveat in there that the division makes just an annual report, I guess?
Yeah, we could add that in there, I suppose.
Okay.
Stacy got that with that addition? All right, so the motion is to approve as presented with the addition of an annual report on poaching statewide. Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those raise your hand in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Stacy, show that as unanimous. Thank you, Wyatt. Appreciate it. We're up to item number 10 on our agenda today, removal of ornamental species from the prohibited species list. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 10:30. like to welcome everyone back to our Wildlife Board meeting on January 4th, 2024. We took a short break and we found Craig. He's online. He's always been online. We just didn't realize that. It's my fault. So let's go ahead and we'll turn the time to you. Craig, is there anything you'd like to discuss or share with us before we get into this particular item? Craig, we're not getting your vocal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I just wanted to apologize for the delay. I was conducting a performance review with one of my employees and was trying to multitask and not doing a good job of it. So anyway, here I am. No, I have nothing to say before I get into my presentation. So
now you froze up.
Wonderful. And can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So good morning. Today I'd like to present the board with a single proposed correction involving the removal of ornamental species from the prohibited fish species list in R6573C, the rule regulating collection, importation, and possession of aquatic wildlife, and R6571313, the rule regulating the taking of fish and crayfish.
Okay, thank you.
So in November of this year, the board approved amendments to R6573C and R6571313. The resulting approved list of prohibited fish species included convict cichlid, which is a commonly sold ornamental fish species. Because they are commonly sold as an ornamental species, the Division of Wildlife Resources is seeking board approval to actually remove convict cichlid from the prohibited list in R6573C and R6571313. DWR removal of convict cichlid from the prohibited list under 6573C and 6571313 will prevent will prevent conflict with the ornamental pet industry. Board approval of the proposed correction presented today would place convict cichlid on the non-controlled list under 6573C, resulting in this species being treated like other fishes commonly sold in the pet trade. And with that pretty simple correction, that's all I have for you today. Thank you. Take any questions.
I guess there's probably no chance of this multiplying in if somebody lets a couple of these things out in one of our water bodies. They look like they're pretty, maybe something to eat them pretty quick.
We do actually have established populations of convict cichlid out on the landscape currently in the Jordan River. They are in hot spring areas because they have thermal tolerances that don't allow them to persist anywhere else in the state.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board?
Are those populations problematic in any way?
No, not right now.
Other questions from the board? This item was not, I think, taken through the RAC, so we don't have to ask our RAC chairs for their updates. Any discussion before we call for a motion? I'll call for a motion.
Motion to approve the division's proposal.
I'll second it.
Motion to approve as presented by Kent, second by Gary. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you all. Sorry for the delay again.
No worries. Okay, we do have one more item today, item number 12, other business. We need to amend some board meeting dates for next year. Am I going to present this? Oh, Justin's going to present it.
Happy to. The first one is the date on the calendar for our June 6th meeting needs to be moved to June 13th, and our December 5th meeting needs to be moved to December 12th. The Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is restructuring when they do some of their meetings, and as a result, this is come into conflict with some of our calendar dates. We've made these changes to the calendars, we've scheduled buildings, and so this is just to put this on the radar of the board members and the RACs.
Yeah, those Western Association of Fish and Wildlife meetings do involve the deputy director, the director, myself, the vice chair.
I've got
So
the
it does-
June one. I don't have the other one.
Okay, so anyway, so there is some conflicts there with those that need to attend this particular meeting, so appreciate that. Any discussion, any concerns with that? Not seeing any, we'll call for a motion.
I make a motion, we approve the amended dates for June and December RAC meet or board meetings.
Motion by Paula, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Bryce. No discussion, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all in favor. It's unanimous. Thank you. Any other discussions necessary today? If not, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Motion made by Kent to adjourn it. Second. Second by Gary. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you.